cup o' kindness yet for Auld Lang Syne.
Maybe we could start by telling me how you got involved in singing. How did that all begin for you?
Well, my mother always told me that I could sing before I could speak. She's not around for me to verify that fact. But I don't remember a time when I didn't sing. And I suppose the first time I remember singing was my first year at primary school, and I regaled the family over the Christmas period by doing the nativity play, singing all the songs from that. I was involved in my local church and joined the choir there, sang all the time, drove my mother crazy. And I was born and brought up in Edinburgh, so she had made some inquiries. There was a children's choir, so I joined that. And then when I went to secondary school, they seemed to think I had something a little special. Mm-hmm. And so she managed to find a singing teacher for me, so I went for singing lessons. And then when I left school, I had applied for the RSAMD in Glasgow and got a place on the performers course.
And you'd be about 17 there or something?
Yeah. So did my 3 years on the performers course, was invited to stay for a fourth year, which happened when they thought you had the potential to become a professional. And then when I left, I was a bit kind of flying in the air, didn't know where I was going to go or what I was going to do. So I did some teaching, went abroad to study, went to London to study, and was a peripatetic singing instructor. Right. In Central Region, as it was at those days. Those days.
So we'll come on to your career later. I want to go back to your childhood. So your parents didn't sing, or were they involved in the church?
No, my father died when I was quite young. I think I was 14, and he had an amazing ability to just pick up an instrument and play it. But I don't think he'd had any formal training. And my mother had had piano lessons when she was a child that she gave up. And in fact, when I had piano lessons and said I wanted to give up, she said, no. It was one of my biggest regrets that my mother just let me do it. And I'm not letting you do it, so you're going to carry on having piano lessons. And I have to say, it's been invaluable my entire life. So I'm very glad she didn't let me stop.
Right, good. So, when you discovered that you could sing, did you notice that you were a good singer when you were a child?
No, I don't think you do. You just enjoy doing it. Right. And as far as I know, nobody in the family had any special vocal talent. Mm-hmm. So I've no idea where it came from. So God-given, really.
The reason I'm asking is that I personally have no musical ability, and it's a great mystery to me how you guys do it. It's something that I told you I'm an up painter.
Well, I mean, everybody has a voice. Most people can sing in the shower. They maybe just wouldn't want anybody hearing them singing in the shower.
I put the earplugs in.
Oh, you don't want to listen to yourself?
Yeah.
No, I do think everybody has a voice, whether or not they've got the courage to use it publicly or whether they just stick to when they're in the shower is a different matter. I just always wanted to sing. It was a great joy for me to do it, and when I found that people actually liked listening to it and it gave them some kind of pleasure, sometimes comfort. I've had people tell me that they were going through a difficult time and they heard me sing and they felt better afterwards. So you just don't know how the people who are listening to you will receive your singing.
One of the first things that I noticed about you when you stood at the podium at the last Burn Supper was that you have a beautiful speaking voice. Is your speaking voice something that changes as you learn to sing, as you become trained in singing?
I guess inevitably it must. I don't remember consciously working on the way I speak, but obviously when you're learning to sing, the words are very important, and so diction is important. And so as I'm speaking to you now, I am being quite precise with my consonants, whereas if I were speaking to you more casually, I would probably leave the ends off words and not pronounce T's in the middle of a word like little. I might do little.
Yeah. Sure.
So it's just a difference between casual and professional.
You're on a very important podcast now, so
I won't do that again.
I did tell you to raise your game. Yeah. So let's go back to your career. You've had an outstanding career performing in Israel and Greece and United States. Tell me something about your experiences there.
Well, that kind of took me by surprise, really, because all I was interested in was singing. And singing, being paid to sing, is just the greatest gift ever. To be paid to do something that you would have done for nothing. Although we never shared that with the opera companies because they wouldn't have paid our salaries. But once I had an agent, he worked, and then subsequently she worked on my behalf to get me work within the opera companies. Once you get known, then sometimes the opera companies will ask for you by name, and other times, excuse me, other times it'll be a conductor who might say, I want these singers. I think that was the case with the Greek National Opera. I think the conductor knew me and knew the soprano he wanted and just said, book these people.
Right.
Other times you have to audition.
Right, I see. So, in terms of high points in your career, what would you say was the moment where you really felt this is sensational?
Well, I suppose really the biggest high point early on in my career, which was also questionable in a sense, was I got a job with Covent Garden. And for any opera singer to be engaged as a principal artist at the Royal Opera is fantastic. My role, however, at the start of the opera was on her knees with a scrubbing cloth, scrubbing blood off the floor. So it's a kind of double-edged sword, which is the phrase I was looking for earlier on, that I made my debut at Covent Garden, scrubbing the stage.
And, do you feel you required acting training for that too, or is it?
We did a little bit of that at the RSAMD, but it was more about interacting with the other people on the stage rather than proper acting skills. I have a blessing and a curse in that my face tells you what I'm thinking before I've realised I've thought it.
Right, yeah.
And it's been like that since I was quite young.
Yeah, so you're no use at poker?
So, no, absolutely no use at poker. And so people used to burst out laughing. And I was, what was the funny? Your face. What about my face? I haven't done anything with my face. But it's just there. And that actually is more important than any physical skills on stage.
Sure.
Because if it's not coming from inside you, if it's not coming through your eyes, then it's not genuine, and it won't travel across a big theatre.
I've seen on television and on stage performers actually weeping while they're singing, and it has to come from the deepest part of your soul, I think, doesn't it?
That's also quite dangerous. I mean, that's happened to me, not so much in opera, but it has happened in opera, but more in recital, that you become so involved in the story that your own body begins to give out the emotion, and that can actually put a lump in your throat, and then you can't sing.
Oh, I see. Right.
And so there's a very fine line between allowing some of that emotion to come through so that tears do run down your face, and not getting so invested in that emotion that suddenly you can't sing whatever you're being required to sing.
I've heard it said that, I don't remember who said this, but that poetry begins with a lump in the throat, but perhaps opera singing ends with a lump in the throat.
Yes. Well, the instrument is very, very delicate, and of course it is housed in the middle of your throat. And so if you've got any deep emotion, you know what it's like yourself. And as a non-singer,
yeah,
when you get very emotional and you can't quite get rid of that tension,
yeah,
that swelling, if you like.
Sure.
And it's that gets in the way of the singing then.
Yeah. So what do you do, to prepare your vocal cords for a performance? Do you? I've heard that Pavarotti used to swallow spoonfuls of honey. I mean, is that a myth, or is that something that you guys do?
I wouldn't be at all surprised if that were true.
Yeah.
I don't actually know. I think lots of singers have their own ways of doing things. So for some people it would be honey or honey and lemon. Whenever I've had a sore throat or a chest infection or anything of that nature, chocolate worked for me.
Right.
Because it created a coating. For other singers that would be an absolute no-no. They wouldn't be able to perform.
Right.
If they had chocolate beforehand. There are various vocal exercises that people do, and they range from just singing a scale up and down through the whole range of the voice to doing other kind of vocal gymnastics, singing phrases from the performance that they maybe think are tricky, and so they want to have them warmed up in the dressing room before they go out there. It's very individual.
So before we started recording, we were just chatting with Derek, our tech operator, who is also a trained opera singer, and I knew I wouldn't be able to remember the name of the type of opera singer that you are. So you could tell me again.
I'm a contralto.
You're a contralto. Derek, you are?
Basso profundo.
Basso profundo.
Correct.
Okay, I knew it.
I didn't start out as a contralto. I started out as a soprano. So when I went to the RSAMD, as the conservatoire was in Glasgow, I was a soprano and
Right.
singing real soprano repertoire.
Yeah.
But after 4 years there, that repertoire was not becoming easier to sing, which it really should have done.
Yeah.
And so I went to study with someone who said, well, you know, your technique's such a mess at the moment, it's hard to say what you are. So let's sort your technique out first, and then we'll see where that goes. And so we spent a couple of years working on my technique, and eventually they said, yep, you're not a soprano, you're a mezzo.
Right.
And the mezzo can sing, you know, if it's a dramatic higher mezzo, maybe less so on the lower roles, but generally speaking, a mezzo can do second soprano, mezzo, contralto.
Okay.
And in fact, there's a former colleague of mine who could sing soprano as well as all those. So if she could sing the role, then she put herself forward to be engaged to do it, whether it was singing Strauss's 4 last songs or Handel's Messiah, singing the contralto solos.
And when you're learning the songs, are you reading music? But you're learning
Yes.
to read music as well? Of course.
Yeah.
Right.
I learnt to read music at primary school. Actually, we had an amateur singer. Well, I'm hoping that's not unkind. I think she was an amateur singer who thought that music and reading music was important. And so, in our music class with her, she had a blackboard and she had the solfege note names and she had a stick, and she would point. It was okay to use my hands. So she would take the stick and she would go do mi so mi fa re ti so do, and that's how I learned to read music. It was this visual thing and the sol fa notes, and then when I played the piano, I learned to read the actual notes.
It's interesting. It sounds a bit like there's a synesthetic quality to it. Do you know what synesthesia is? It's when a lot of creative people have this phenomenon where when you think of one thing, some other visual metaphor appears in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
So when I personally think about days of the week, I see them going out in space through the room.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that when you see the notes, you're seeing this visual representation of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it helps you remember.
And you get to the stage eventually where when you're looking at the staff notation, you don't even have to figure out what the notes are because you recognise the distance. And so you're not trying to work out what the notes are, you just instinctively know that a fourth or a third or a second, or you know what it is, you know what it sounds like. And so your voice just automatically goes to it.
It becomes like sort of muscle memory almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about that in the last podcast and it was a violinist, and he was saying that muscle memory is really important to musicians. So it becomes part of your unconscious mechanism to do.
And it's one of those things that for every musician, but I'm speaking as a singer, that muscle memory is so strong that when you go back years later, the chances are if you sing a song that you sang 20 years ago, you're probably going to sing it the way you sang it 20 years ago initially. Yeah. And then you go, no, let's take this as if it's a new song again. You know?
Sure.
I remember watching the Three Tenors, and actually I think it was a documentary about the Three Tenors concert, and they were doing Maria, I think it was Maria from West Side Story. Now of course Jose Carreras had done the recording with Bernstein, but Domingo and Pavarotti were singing it up, I think a semitone, and that gave Carreras huge problems because all of his muscle memory was just down that fraction, and to suddenly shift your technique up.
Is a semitone a big difference, to well, let's say somebody who doesn't have an attuned ear for music. Would I notice that or not?
Not unless you had perfect pitch.
Right.
It can make the difference of being slightly in the cracks of your voice or not being in the cracks of your voice. So it can, for the singer, make a huge difference.
I saw an interview recently with some producers who had been working with Michael Jackson, and he was giving them instructions about where to place a beat, and he was trying to explain it to them, and they couldn't hear what he was hearing. No. And he was saying, "No, look, listen, it's just a slight delay in the beat," and they thought that was really spoke to his genius and his ability to give that song that extra something just by adding in a few milliseconds to the beat. Yeah. So,
and that sometimes in singing can be the difference between the text being very clear and being slightly fudged. And so sometimes you want to put your consonant just before the point at which the note should start. So on the bar line or just before the bar line rather than on it. So that you get rid of the consonant as quickly as you can, right. And then you get on to the sound of the note, which is what people want to hear.
Yeah. So after you graduated, did you feel that, you know, your career was moving quite quickly, or was it was there a moment that you felt like you kind of had a breakthrough?
No, I think when I finished at the college, I had no clear idea of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go. And so for that year, I don't actually remember what I did for that year, but I kind of spent a year prevaricating about what I should do. And then I went to study in Germany with the late Hans Hotter, who was the greatest Wotan of his day. And I went and studied with him twice. And then Ian Wallace, the late Scottish buffo, I did some work with him, and he said, I know who you should go to. You should go to this lady called Audrey Tennant. I'm going to get in touch with her. So he put us together, and I went to Audrey. Audrey was the lady who said, your technique's such a mess, who knows what voice range you are. And she was the revelation. She was the one who made the breakthrough in my voice. And so, as I said, you know, we did a couple of years, and then she said to me, you're not a soprano. You're a mezzo stroke contralto. So we'll just darken the bottom of your voice. It'll take me about 10 minutes, she said.
Right.
And I'm like, okay. And yeah, it was about 10 minutes. And it was as if someone had opened the padlock that was on my voice. And suddenly I could just think something, and it happened. And that was the most exhilarating, liberating feeling that I think I ever had in my singing. That moment where it all just fell into place and it worked, and it was fabulous.
It's interesting to me listening to you speak, because it's obvious that there was so much emphasis on technique and unlocking your full capacity as a singer. Whereas if you go to art college, which was just up the road, you know, I went to Glasgow School of Art, and there was virtually no emphasis on technique. It was all theoretical, and it was all about ideas and imagination and developing that side of art rather than the nuts and bolts of how do you draw well. And I think that's almost completely gone from art colleges nowadays. But I am quite envious of the experience that you had. Well,
I mean, there are thoughts out there in the singing teaching world of the broad brushstrokes, and going much more for the emotion and the mood, and not worrying quite so much about the technique. And the difficulty with that is, if you get a day like today, I happen to be a bit chesty, I need my technique to get me through that, because I'm not on 100% health.
Sure.
And so you do need some technique so that you can, you know, when you get to the really high level, well, actually any level in the professional career, if you don't sing the performance, you don't get paid. So you want to look after your health, and you want to make sure that you're okay and that you're always on form. And your technique can be the difference between having to cancel the show and being able to sing the show.
Sure. Prior to a performance, do you ever try to change your mind state, or consciously try to change your mind state, or does that happen while you're doing a few sort of vocal exercises?
How do you mean change your mind state?
Well,
when you're not well?
No, I'm talking about, you know, just prior to a performance, perhaps half an hour before, or even in the morning before you perform. That, you know, artists, for example, don't just walk in and start painting.
Oh yeah, see what you mean.
I meant painters, visual artists. they might spend some time rearranging the studio, sitting, meditating, and then you're getting into a different brain state. And I wondered how it was for you.
Yeah, well, and again, that's a very personal thing across singers. If I have nothing else on the day, if I don't have another rehearsal, because sometimes you have a rehearsal for another show in the morning and then you have a performance in the evening. So if I don't have that, then yes, I take the day to think about what I'm doing, warming up, dealing with the butterflies in the tummy and worrying if I don't have them, because experience has taught me if I don't get nervous before a performance, I don't do as well as I would like to do.
Sure.
The minute I walk on stage, the nerves are gone, but I like to feel that kind of, why did I think this was a good idea?
Yeah.
Moment, you know. You don't always get the luxury of a half an hour before the show because there are wigs and makeup and there's an order that people get done in, so you might still be sitting in the wig room at the 15-minute call. But you should always have at least 5 minutes where you can just sit down, close your eyes, meditate, whatever it is you think you need to do to prepare yourself. Also depends on whether you're absolutely on at the curtain up or whether you've got a 40-minute wait.
Yeah.
And that can happen.
Sure. And do singers and performers, do they, I mean, in your personal experience, do they support you and do they kind of G you up beforehand, or do you leave each other alone? Is it?
Again, that depends on the individual. So both happen. There are some singers who like to be left alone, and there are others who need that support. And you just learn as you're going through the rehearsal period, it becomes apparent what kind of person people are. And then we try to be supportive to all the ones who need supportive, and even leaving someone alone if that's what they want is being supportive.
We had a band perform here a few months ago, and they're very professional. Every aspect of their interaction with me was so professional and organised. And I was just passing by them right before they went on stage, and I got caught up in their huddle, and there was like a big group hug with all the band, and I thought that was really heartwarming to see them all supporting each other and how seriously they took it, and they absolutely loved what they were doing. And I thought great camaraderie between them, and I got sucked into it as well. So it was nice. But I'm like,
well, but you do need that, particularly if you're doing an ensemble opera, where all of the characters, no real standout star, as it were. All the characters are working together, and so you do need to have that. If you've got any kind of friction, between people, then that will show.
Sure.
It's where you have, an opera that's got either very little chorus to be supportive, or very few characters, or your character. I mentioned Electra as my debut at Covent Garden. The role of Electra, once she comes on stage, she pretty much doesn't leave the stage for an hour and 45 minutes.
Wow.
And her character is not a popular one, so she's not getting support.
Yeah.
The other characters round about her are not being caring and kind in the story.
And that's something that a performer or a public speaker, I've experienced this myself, you can feel when the audience is changing. They don't like something you've said. There's an energy in the room.
Yeah.
You must have experienced that too.
You can do. It depends on the size of the venue. So if it's a really big venue, I remember with the D'Oyly Cart, we went to the Empire, Liverpool Empire, which is a huge barn of a place. And it was the early week. I can't remember if we started on the Monday or the Tuesday that week. And they hadn't sold very many tickets. And most of the tickets they'd sold were at the back of the stalls. And we couldn't hear we couldn't see them. There were just empty seats in front of us. And we couldn't hear any response from them. And that was really soul-destroying, because the piece was a comedy. And we expected to be able to hear some interaction with the audience, and there was absolutely nothing. And we all came off stage at the interval really quite depressed. And our staff director, who travelled with us, came backstage and said, "Oh, they're loving it." And I went, "Really?" So, "Oh, yes. They're chuckling away in the seats." And we can't hear that.
Aye.
So you do actually need some kind of feedback from the audience. And it doesn't have to be loud laughter, but there's an energy that comes across the footlights from the audience. And as you say, you can feel it both ways. If it's a negative energy, you can feel that too.
I suppose even as you and I are speaking right now, if I was just frozen staring at you without nodding or smiling, or it would put you off. And
well, I would be wondering whether I was just speaking rubbish.
Well, you're not. So
or boring you.
Well, you're certainly not doing that. Don't worry. Well, maybe we should talk about Robert Burns, since that's right around the corner, and that was my first engagement with you at Burns Supper last year. Perhaps you could just explain, what the essence of your talk was there.
Do you want the short version or the long version?
Or whatever you want.
So to be asked to deliver the immortal memory was a real shock. It's not something I had ever thought I would do. I'm not a public speaker. And my initial reaction was to say, no, that's not what I do. And no. So, a change of tack. It was then put to me that they wanted me to speak about the songs of Burns. And I'm thinking, okay, he wrote nearly 400. You want me to talk about them all? Because nobody had ever done that for that particular Burns Club. And so in the end, I kind of got myself backed into a corner, because I said, well, I certainly couldn't do it in 3 months, because this was October 19 and it was for January 2020. And I said, I certainly couldn't do it in 3 months. It would have to be at least 2021. Done. Okay, so we'll put you down for the 2021 Burns Supper. And I thought, okay. It's not really what I was aiming for, but never mind. And then, of course, COVID hit.
Yeah.
And so it never actually made the light of day until 2023.
Yes.
And because I'm not a public speaker and I'm not a Burns scholar, I've sung Burns all my life. But, I had to go away and look at things and study things and find a hook. Because with nearly 400 songs, where do you start with that? And so I had picked some songs, and I'd done all my research, and I'd created this. I'm giving away real secrets. Anyone from the Burns Club will be going, she did what? So I got it all together. And then in the January of 2023, I still wasn't happy with it. And I thought, there's something seriously wrong with this, and I can't quite figure out what it was. And I went to visit someone in the Victoria Hospital in Kirkcaldy. And as I was driving along the motorway, I thought, right, let's just say this. I couldn't remember half of it. And I thought, if I can't remember what I'm supposed to be saying, it must be really quite uninteresting.
Right.
How do I fix this? And suddenly I had this light bulb moment where I thought, it's not my voice. People expect to hear my voice, and I'm not singing. So how can I change it so that I'm singing? And so that's what I did, and I made the changes I needed to make. Most of what I did was the original talk. The difference was that I whittled the songs down to 3, and I did the comparisons with tunes that they were either originally set to or tunes that Burns chose but didn't like, and just to see what the difference was. Do we think that this tune, had that been the one they'd stuck with, would the song be as popular today as it is? Or would it have suffered, or would it have disappeared into oblivion if they'd stuck with that tune? And I'll sing them.
Great.
And then for all the people who want to hear some historical stuff, that's in there. For all the people who want to hear my voice, that's in there. And hopefully that will be a good combination. And certainly by the time I'd put the final full stop in, I felt a huge weight come off my shoulders. I thought, this I'm happy with. I mean, I went back and tinkered over the next couple of weeks, but this I'm happy with. This I feel says something new. So that was how that all came about.
So are you going to be able to do a comparison for us today?
Yes, and I mean, which one would you like? So I looked at My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose and A Man's a Man, for all that, and of course Auld Lang Syne. So have you got a preference as to which one you'd like to hear?
Well,
You're going to sing all 3?
No, I think whoever's listening to this will possibly want to hear Auld Lang Syne.
Okay. So when Burns wrote Auld Lang Syne, normally he would have taken the the tune and set the words to the tune. But he'd seen another song that began with "Should Old Acquaintance Be Forgot," and that spoke to him, and he wanted to write a song using that as the opening line. And so he took this tune, which I'm going to have to refer to my notes because I can't. Oh,
that's all right.
Sorry, I can't quite remember what was the name of the original tune. Anyway, so he set it to. Oh, can't find what he set it to. Doesn't say. Anyway, it was a tune that existed at the time. You can edit that bit out, can't you? It was a tune that existed at the time, and he thought it was pretty mediocre. He didn't really like it at all. And so after his death, George Thompson, his publisher, thought, great, we can change this. So he changed the tune to "O Can Ye Labour Lee," which was actually a previous song of Burns. So he would have recognised the tune. And so that's what we sing it to now. Right. And of course, it's so globally famous and has been for decades, centuries, that I don't think there'd be any way you would change it now. Although Eddie Reader is one of the people that I've heard trying to revive the original tune,
right,
which goes like this. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot and old lang syne, and old lang syne, my Jo, and old lang syne, we'll tak a cup o' kindness yet for old lang syne.
Very different, but very beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't know that I would say it was mediocre.
No.
And sometimes I think that the singing of Auld Lang Syne as we know it now just is a bit kind of passé. And it certainly irritates me when people put in "for the sake of."
Aye. For the American audience.
I don't think that will replace it.
No. It just has a different mood, I think,
Yes.
but it is very beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you want to sing the more popular version?
Oh, right.
So that we can do the comparison, yeah.
Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind, should old acquaintance be forgot and old lang syne, for old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll tak a cup o' kindness yet for old lang syne.
I think I almost prefer the first one now because I'm so familiar with that one. That
well, and it's had so many different interpretations and what have you across the years. It's been used in so many different ways. And every year, of course, they put Wonderful Life on the television at Christmas. And what Hollywood does to Auld Lang Syne at the end of that film is they throw everything at it.
Yeah.
All of that Hollywood razzmatazz and the orchestra and the voices and the choirs and it's amazing. But far removed from, I think, Burns' original idea.
It's funny you mention it because we actually had a screening of It's a Wonderful Life downstairs in the gallery at Christmas time, and I went away for half an hour and I came back and turned the lights on and everybody was in tears.
And it does have that, in certain circumstances, it does have that ability because it tugs at the heartstrings in a way perhaps no other song does. And for all the Scots who travelled across the world and took the songs and culture with them, and that was the one song that they took with them for New Year.
Yeah.
And it's been adopted by so many different countries in so many different ways.
I'm a lover of poetry, and it always fascinates me how just a couple of lines can puncture your soul and stay there for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Once heard, never forgotten. I remember I was jogging with my dad when I was about 14 or something, and we were talking about experiences in life and romance and things and how life passes by. And he said, pleasures are like poppies spread. You seize the flower, the bloom is shed. Like the snow falls in the river, a moment white and melts forever. I just never forgot it. It was,
No.
you couldn't, and I didn't know I was into poetry then, but maybe that was the start of it.
Well, and I think that's part of Burns' genius, that he can take a few words and write a 6,000-page story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think about, I'm doing a Burns supper in a couple of weeks, and I'm going to be singing John Anderson, My Joe. And I think, you know, in 4 lines, he sums up this couple's life. And the other beauty of it is you can take the words at face value. So you can have John Anderson, my Joe, John, we climb the hill together, and mony a canty day, John, we've had wi' ane another. Now we mun totter doon, John, and hand we'll go, and we'll sleep together at the foot, John Anderson, my Joe. And just take it as it is. Nice. But for me, it's, we've had a hard life.
Mm-hmm.
We climbed the hill. We struggled. But we also had good times. But now we're getting to our lives' end, and we're just going to gently slide down into that great sleep, hand in hand. 4 lines, that whole lifespan of that couple. Amazing.
It's the great. That's the feature of great art, is that when you zoom in on it, that you see more and more, and it seems to have. It's like inexhaustible, you know. It just you can dwell upon just a few lines all afternoon and keep thinking about it, and then return to it, and you find more meaning in it.
Well, and this is true very much so of whether it's an operatic role or whether it's a German leader or whether it's Burns. There are layers, and you can stop at the obvious one, or you can dig a little deeper and see how far down you can go. What kind of story can you create?
Yeah.
And that makes it really interesting.
It's, you know, great writers, great poets, they have this ability to communicate truth that resonates in so few words. And, you know, I was thinking about Burns this morning, obviously, for preparation for this conversation, but, you know, he was right at the forefront of the Romantic period, and he was born 10 years after Goethe, and it's like the Romantic period is probably my favourite period in all of all of literature. But they're famous for long meandering sentences in their prose. But Burns wasn't really like that. He was quite contained, just in the way that you explained. Yeah. So,
but that, when you're talking about the resonating with people, I mean, that's where something like A Man's a Man for All That. It resonates as much today as it did when he wrote it.
Yeah.
Every single verse, there's something in there that is appropriate for now, 2024.
Yeah.
And yet it was written so long ago.
His verse, it has this sort of like biblical quality in that sense. You know, something that's written to us that seems like a long time ago, you know, the 18th century, but it's still resonant. The human nature doesn't change.
That is exactly it. Human nature does not change. And he managed to capture it so beautifully. It's like Gilbert and Sullivan, which was my first big major professional job. Gilbert's words are based on human nature. And that, as you say, doesn't change. So they're actually as pertinent today as they were when he wrote them.
I think generally one of the difficult things for any living artist is to try to be relevant. And in your quest to do that, your temptation is to get caught up in the surface texture of the contemporaneous culture. But if you focus on human nature, which doesn't change, then your work will always have that timeless quality, and it'll pass right through the centuries. And that's what you see with Burns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I wish human nature would change, because then we would learn from history, but it doesn't.
Yes, it's not changing anytime soon.
No.
Yeah. So, perhaps you'd like to sing one more song for us, Francis?
Okay. Well, I think it depends on whether you want comedy or a real example of how the wrong tune ruins the words.
Let's hear that. Yeah.
The wrong tune ruining the words. So in my opinion, that would be My Love Is Like a Red, Red Rose.
Yeah.
So which Burns set to Major Graham's Strathspey. And the tempo marking at the beginning is a crochet equals 84, which is quite fast. Has that got that right? Yes. And so that will affect the thing as well. I'll just double check. I know where I'm going with the tune here. Yes. My love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. My love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair art thou, my bonny lass, said deep in love am I, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles. Now you see, I got the words wrong because the tune's not right.
It's just too cheery, it's celebratory or something.
Well, yeah, and it puts the stresses in the wrong place. So red, red rose. It's not the fact that it was a rose, it's the fact it was a red rose. A really red rose. And sweetly played in June. Sweetly played in June, you know. And so to give the comparison, oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June. Oh, my love is like a melody that's sweetly played in tune. As fair art thou, my bonny lass, sae deep in love am I, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 miles. Though it were 10,000 mile, my dear, though it were 10,000 mile, and I will come again, my love, though it were 10,000 mile.
Wow. That's sensational.
I mean, why would anyone use that first tune?
I mean,
I don't know, but that was Burns' choice. That's what he set it to.
Well, he got that wrong, didn't he? the melody opens up the meaning of the song, and you know, not least your voice. Your voice is just outstanding, and it's.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. No, it's
not bad for someone with a chest infection.
But I mean, the whole thing sung properly, it evokes the feeling of being in love, and it's perhaps you have to have been in love to understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. But that shows the importance of getting the right tune to go with the words.
Yeah.
Which is presumably why he always started with the tune. If you start with the words, then you're scrabbling about trying to find an existing tune, perhaps, that doesn't quite work. Or you write a tune that just doesn't give that flow.
I'm often quite amused by, if you look up the lyrics of a song online, and they just seem so flat. They just how did the songwriter turn that into such a great pop song or something? But it's interesting. It's the melody and
I think that also depends on the person. So Bob Dylan, for example, found this particular set of words the biggest influence in his life for the writing of his songs.
That's astonishing. I didn't know that. Because I'm a big Bob Dylan fan,
there was a Virgin store. I can't remember if it was a challenge or just a kind of survey. So they contacted 100 artists, singers, songwriters at the time. So there were people like Elton John and Paul McCartney who were also surveyed, and Bob Dylan was the only one to cite a poet as his biggest influence. The rest of them all cited other musicians.
Yeah.
But no, Bob Dylan said it had a huge influence on his writing.
When Oscar Wilde was imprisoned in Reading jail, he asked for 3 books. I think he was perhaps only allowed 3, so he asked for the King James Bible, the complete works of Robert Burns, and Dante's Divine Comedy. That's quite a recommendation, I think.
I think so, yes. Yeah. Covers really just about everything.
Yeah, it's good. But I think the measure of a great poet is by the influence they've had on the culture throughout the centuries.
And it's interesting that Burns had an influence on classical composers as well, which is not something he liked. So at the time that he was writing his music, Haydn and Pleyel were doing arrangements of his music, and he really was not happy because he wanted it to be that honest, down-to-earth, the people's music, and he didn't want all this fancy classical stuff and proper trained voices singing his songs. But down the centuries, people have done that. So Shostakovich and Ravel, Mendelssohn, Brahms, Schumann, they've all taken some of his poems and put their own settings of music on them.
I've often thought it's one of the ironies of, Burns suppers that they're so middle class, upper class. They're quite stuffy. When he was a man who had his fingers in reality, very much, and it's. I think that there's a slight mismatch there, but it's as much fun as these things are.
I think I might be right, and apologies if I'm not. But there was a time when the Burns clubs were just men.
Yeah.
So to let a woman through the door, it was quite revolutionary.
Aye. And of course, he was a great lover of women, so another irony. Yeah, but I will see you again on Wednesday evening.
Well, yes, when we can sing Auld Lang Syne together.
Yeah, I'll look forward to that.
I'll look for you across the crowded room.
Well, I feel like I've had a special privilege today, Francis, and it's been an incredible pleasure.
It's been a great pleasure, and I hope I've been factually correct in everything I've said.
Well, I know I haven't, so I'm just going to say thank you so much for coming again, and I hope you come back sometime.
Thank you. I'd love to.